Emily pressed her palm against the glossy wooden panel of the hallway wall, her ankle throbbing with a pain so sharp it felt like thousands of needles driving into her each time she took a step. The crystal chandelier shimmering above her blurred through the rising burn of tears, yet she forced herself to blink, to hold them back. She would not let him see her break. "I told you, walk straight, Emily." Charles Maddox's voice cut through the air with the precision of a scalpel, cold and mercilessly controlled. He stood at the opposite end of the long hallway, arms crossed over a tailored deep blue suit, his gray eyes as frigid as winter mist tracking her unsteady steps the way a patient predator watches prey on the verge of collapsing. "You are making a fool of yourself." Emily tried to stand upright, shifting her weight onto her good leg, but the pain in her left ankle flared so violently she had to brace herself against the wall just to remain standing. The ache shot upward into her thigh, and sweat gathered at the nape of her neck, even though the November wind seeped faintly through the sealed window panes. The polished wooden hallway stretched on endlessly, like a corridor without escape, and he stood at the end of it like a locked door. She no longer knew what hurt more, the bone that felt as if it were splintering with every breath, or the icy, emotionless stare of the man who had taken control of her life for the past 6 months. I cannot," she whispered, her voice ragged, fragile. "Cannot or will not." He took 3 measured steps toward her, steady and decisive. Emily shrank back against the wall, as if the wood itself might swallow her and hide her from him. His face did not change, and that was what terrified her the most. Other men revealed their cruelty in their eyes. He did not. He never needed to shout, never needed to strike. He simply had to stand there and speak in that even, unhurried tone, and people crumbled. "My fiancé is not allowed to limp. My fiancé must stand straight beside me at every event, every meeting, every important moment. Do you understand what you are risking with this little performance, Emily?" Performance. As if she had chosen to fall down the wooden staircase 2 nights ago. As if she had wished for her ankle to twist so unnaturally she thought she would faint from the pain. He had been the one standing at the top of the stairs that night. He had been the one who did nothing when his sister Victoria charged toward her with a murderous glare. "Charles, please." She said his name the way he required her to, her voice thin, barely more than a breath dissolving into the air. "I think there is something truly wrong with my leg. It is swollen, and I can hardly... Enough." He lifted one hand, not loudly, not harshly, yet the gesture sliced through her words, as if an invisible thread had snapped them apart. "The party begins in 3 hours. You will be ready. You will be perfect. And you will not embarrass me in front of the people who hold power over half this country. Understood?" Emily nodded. What choice did she have? When Charles Maddox gave an order, refusal had no meaning. She had learned that the day her father brought her here, his hands trembling around a contract she was not permitted to read. She had been reminded of it every day since, through the silent glances of the servants, the locked doors, the smallest gestures of a man who never needed to raise his voice to inspire fear. Charles turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing through the hallway like a cold hymn of power. She watched him disappear around the corner before her body gave out and she slid down the wall, one leg no longer able to hold her upright. She sat on the polished floor, her back against the wood, the pain in her ankle burning fiercely. The swollen bruise had spread, dark and blooming beneath her skin like spilled ink. She had asked a servant for ice early that morning, but the woman had only shaken her head in terror before hurrying off. In this house, no one acted without Charles's permission. Emily closed her eyes, trying to breathe through the relentless waves of pain. 3 hours. She had 3 hours to relearn how to walk like a normal person. Or to find a way out of this place, if any chance remained at all. In that breathless moment, when the long hallway seemed to swallow Emily whole, and the story slowly peeled back its darker layers, if you are following this journey and wish to continue walking beside us through the emotional and dramatic chapters yet to come, please subscribe to the channel, like and share the video to encourage us to bring more meaningful stories every single day. And if you are listening from anywhere in the world, please leave a comment and tell us which city and which country you are hearing this story from, so I may know from what distant corner of the world Emily's journey has reached your heart. Emily sat leaning against the cold wooden wall, her breath breaking apart as sharp waves of pain traveled from her ankle up through her thigh, and the hallway outside lay in a silence so absolute it felt menacing, broken only by the faint ticking of an old wall clock that seemed to count down the remaining seconds of her life locked inside this mansion. In that moment, with Charles gone and her strength dissolving with his absence, the memory of how she ended up imprisoned here surged back like a violent storm. It had all begun with her father, David Carter, A man who once possessed everything, a beloved woodworking shop, a reputation built on integrity, and a daughter he cherished above all else. But after her mother died, he seemed to lose half his soul. He began drinking more, disappearing from the shop, and eventually slipping into gambling games he had no chance of winning. At first the debts were small, but they grew and multiplied, interest feeding on interest, until the day he signed a hidden agreement with Charles Maddox, the head of one of the largest underground financial networks in the Northeast, a man he believed was merely a generous, mysterious investor wanting to help a struggling shop owner. He had no idea to whom he had sold his soul, or that the loan he signed, filled with vague clauses and a ballooning interest rate, would trap Emily on a path with no escape. That night, everything changed when he was stopped right outside their home. Men dressed in black with no badges and no words appeared like shadows. Emily heard the commotion, ran out, and saw her father kneeling on the pavement with trembling hands, while the man standing before him was Charles Maddox. Back then, Charles was not the icy figure she knew now, but a man who smiled politely, his soft voice hiding something that made the skin crawl. "You owe me a substantial amount, Mr. Carter. I do not want your shop. I do not need your money. I only need a guarantee." A guarantee. Those words haunted her forever. She remembered her father's face, drained of all color, as he turned toward her, and in the length of a heartbeat she sensed something terrible unfolding, as if an enormous door behind her were slowly closing. Charles continued in that gentle, chilling voice. "Your daughter is lovely, young, polite, intelligent. A woman like her could provide me with far more value than any amount." Emily had screamed, tried to pull her father to his feet, but everything happened too quickly. He could only sob, begging her forgiveness, while Charles offered a new arrangement. If he wanted his debts erased and his shop spared, Emily would come to live at Charles's estate to support his public image, attend his meetings and his parties, stand beside him as a symbol of his influence. That was what he called it, but both she and her father knew it was nothing more than a polished phrase for turning her into an elegant ornament. Her father collapsed as he signed the papers, his hand trembling so violently he could barely hold the pen. The day she was placed into the luxury car that would take her to the mansion, he ran after it, shouting her name until his voice dissolved into the distance in the rearview mirror. It was the last time she saw him. Charles allowed no contact, no letters, no calls, not a single message. Everything was severed completely. She had been brought into this mansion like an object already sealed away. Emily wrapped her arms around her knees, the pain in her leg blending with the ache inside her chest. 6 months had passed. 6 months of living among elegant wooden walls and endless hallways, in the fearful silence of the staff and under the cutting, watchful gaze of Charles. He never needed to tie her down. He had bound her with something far more terrifying, absolute power. Emily opened her eyes and stared at the long corridor stretching forward like a path leading into a gilded prison. She had paid the price for her father's mistake, but she refused to spend the rest of her life dying slowly within these walls. A thought flickered through her mind, fragile yet bright as a thin thread of light. There had to be a way out. Even if the chance was 1 in 1,000, she had to try, because if she did not, she would die in this house with her heart still beating. Emily still remembered every detail of that night as if the memory had been stamped permanently into her mind, unable to fade no matter how much time passed. It had been a night of light drizzle, the sky darkening early, and the air inside the mansion growing heavy with the sense that something was about to break. Charles had been preparing for an important meeting the next morning, a gathering with foreign partners he called the key figures of his soon-to-expand empire. He wanted everything perfect, and that meant Emily had to appear like a modern princess, without a flaw, without a mark, without an opinion. She had tried on 3 dresses only for him to dismiss each one with a single tightening of his brow. She had wanted to walk away, to simply say she was unwell, that her ankle hurt, that she needed rest. But he had looked at her without a word or a gesture, and she understood that his silent stare carried more weight than 1,000 threats. Swallowing hard, she left the sitting room quietly. That was when Victoria appeared. Charles's only sister, 2 years younger than he was, with skin pale like porcelain and long black hair always pinned tightly, as though she had stepped out of a museum. She lived in the southern wing of the mansion and rarely emerged, but whenever she did, she brought with her a chill that crept beneath the skin. From the first day Emily arrived, Victoria had hated her. She never explained why. She never needed to. Perhaps because Emily was an outsider, or because Victoria despised anyone Charles paid attention to, even if only to use. That night, as Emily moved toward the staircase to return to her room, Victoria stood on the landing, staring down at her with hollow eyes. "You are the one chosen to accompany him again?" Her voice slipped through the air like a soft hiss. Emily stopped midway up the steps, fingers gripping the polished wood rail. "I do not have a choice." Victoria's lips curved, a cold smile as sharp as frost. "You always speak like a victim." Pathetic. She descended the stairs with slow, graceful steps, silk brushing against the wooden treads. When she reached the lower landing, Emily stepped aside, intending to continue upward, but Victoria suddenly thrust her hand out and shoved her hard in the shoulder. The force came without warning, stronger than Emily had expected. She slipped. Her foot missed the edge. Her body pitched backward down the stairs. Everything happened in seconds, yet stretched out like a lifetime. She struck the wooden steps. Her knee slammed hard. Her elbow scraped raw, but it was her ankle that released the horrifying, dry crack that blurred her vision. A single sharp snap that stole her breath. When she reached the bottom, the pain rushed through her like fire, choking her, silencing her. She could not breathe. She could not scream. Only her heartbeat hammered wildly, and her foot had already begun to swell, twisting unnaturally. She heard footsteps. Charles. He appeared at the top of the staircase, standing beside Victoria, looking down at her. He did not hurry. He did not show shock. His eyes studied her the way one might evaluate a business decision. "She fell," Victoria said, her voice flat, almost clinical. "She was careless." Emily cried out, her throat burning. "She pushed me." "Charles, she..." But he did not ask a single question. He turned to Victoria and spoke a few short, cold words in Russian before walking away. No one helped her. No one called a doctor. She remained at the foot of the staircase for nearly 15 minutes before 2 servants arrived, lifting her as though removing a broken object. They carried her to her room and laid her on the bed without speaking. By then her ankle had swollen to twice its size, dark bruises spreading across her foot like spilled ink. Emily gasped and begged to be taken to a hospital, but no one answered. A woman brought her a small pack of ice, set it gently on her injury, and retreated silently the moment Emily attempted to ask her name. That night, Emily lay awake in a haze of pain and fear. She knew her ankle was not merely sprained, it was far worse. But Charles had already decided the matter. To him, a fall was nothing more than an inconvenience. To her, it was a sentence without end. She was forbidden to leave the mansion, forbidden to call anyone, forbidden even to mention the staircase. No one spoke of the incident. It was treated as if it had never happened. But every stab of pain when she moved reminded her of the truth. It was real, and it was destroying her, piece by piece. The morning after that harrowing fall, Emily awoke to a wave of pain rippling through her entire body, but nothing hurt more than her left ankle, swollen so severely she could no longer see its natural curve. The deep bruising climbed all the way up her calf, stark beneath the weak light filtering through the curtains. When she tried to shift upright, a sharp, tearing bolt of agony shot through her, forcing her to bite down hard on her lip just to hold back a cry. She knew she needed a doctor, an X-ray, proper bandaging, real help, but inside this sealed room, such needs were nothing more than echoes swallowed by emptiness. When the door suddenly swung open, she flinched. Charles stepped inside, dressed in a razor-sharp black suit, his tie perfectly aligned, his hair combed so meticulously, not a single strand dared misbehave. He looked immaculate, as though untouched by the nightmare she had endured. He stood at the foot of the bed, his gaze sweeping over her injured leg as if assessing a defective item. "You will stand beside me tonight," he said without wasting a single breath. "The gala in Manhattan is a major opportunity. I will not accept any obstacle from you." Emily parted her lips, but her voice seemed trapped in her throat. "Charles, I cannot even stand. My leg. I need a hospital. It is truly serious." He cut her off with a single, blade-sharp lift of his brow. "You have only a mild sprain. Stop exaggerating things just to draw attention." Emily tightened her grip on the blanket beneath her fingers. "I am not exaggerating. It hurts unbearably. I cannot even touch the floor." Charles stepped closer, his voice lowering. "Emily, do you know how many people want to stand beside me at events like this? How many women would trade everything for the position you have?" She let out a faint, desperate laugh. "A position?" "Yes, a position." Charles leaned down, lifting her chin between 2 cold fingers. "You come with me. You smile at the right moments. You hold my hand when I need it. That is your duty. That is why you exist here." "I am not a display piece," Emily whispered. But Charles tightened his grip on her chin until the words collapsed into a strangled sound. Do not misunderstand. You are my guarantee. And tonight, you will appear, whether you are in pain or not." He released her, straightened, and cast a fleeting look of irritation at her leg. "I will send my own doctor to take a look if it keeps you quiet, but do not expect to leave this house. That is not happening." Emily clutched the blanket, fighting the tremor rising through her body. "And if I truly cannot walk?" Charles turned back to her, his gaze colder than the winter air outside. "If you embarrass me," he said slowly, "if you make me appear weak in front of my partners, then I will make sure you understand what real pain is." It felt as if the air in the room had been sucked away. He did not need to shout, did not need to threaten with force. His eyes alone told her he would do anything to protect his image. When he left the room, the door slammed hard enough to make the wooden frame shudder, and Emily slipped into a state suspended between dread and exhaustion. He wanted her to appear before the public like a flawless doll, standing at his side to cement his power. But how could she possibly stand when her leg felt nearly paralyzed by pain? She looked down at her swollen ankle, feeling as though her own body were giving her its final warning. If she tried to walk tonight, it might break completely. If she refused, Charles would not spare her, and if she stayed here, sooner or later she would lose both her life and her soul. Fear rose in her chest, crushing, suffocating, yet beneath it, faint but unmistakable, a small spark of defiance began to flicker. She could not go on living as a shadow. She could not continue being controlled like a possession. Tonight, Charles wanted her to appear, but she wanted something else far more. She wanted freedom, and in this pain, she knew one undeniable truth. If she did not find a way out, she would never stand up again. That afternoon, when the housemaid brought in a tray of herbal tea and left without saying a single word, Emily noticed something strange. On the tray, tucked beneath a thin lace napkin, was a small mobile phone, an old model without internet, the kind used only for calls and simple text messages. She could hardly believe what she was seeing. Charles had strictly forbidden all forms of personal communication. Her own phone had been confiscated the very first day she arrived at the mansion. Every call was monitored. Everyone in the house was as silent as wax figures, too afraid to hand her anything without permission. Emily watched the door close, then with trembling fingers she pulled the phone out from beneath the cloth. The screen lit up the moment she pressed the power button. There was a single message, just one line, from an unfamiliar number not saved in the contacts. Its contents froze her in place. "I am Dr. Lauren Parker. I treated you after the staircase incident. Your medical record shows you fractured your left fibula, not a sprain. I want to meet you." Emily read the line again and again, her heart thudding so violently it felt ready to burst from her chest. A fracture, not a sprain. She had known she was not imagining it, the agony, the numbness, the sharp slicing pain every time she moved. But Charles had insisted it was only a mild sprain, and he had repeated that lie to everyone in the house. He had not allowed her to see any doctor except the gray-haired man he called his family physician, who had glanced at her injury for barely 3 minutes before prescribing painkillers she had never been allowed to take in full doses. Emily tightened her grip on the phone. If this woman truly was a real doctor, if she had actually treated her, why was she contacting her only now? Could she trust her? Was this yet another trap from Charles to test her loyalty? Or was it a small crack in the fortress of control he had built around her? She had no idea how this phone had reached her hands. Who was that maid? Why would someone risk so much for her? None of the questions had answers, but her instincts warned her she could not ignore this chance. With shaking fingers, she typed her reply. "I want to meet you, but I am being watched. I cannot leave the house. Do you have a way?" The message was sent, and Emily held her breath. Minutes passed, the screen remaining silent. She began to fear she had already been discovered, that the phone was being tracked, or that someone had been watching her from the moment she lifted it. But then, a soft tone signaled an incoming message. "Meet me behind the greenhouse at 8 o'clock tonight. I can get you out. Bring nothing. Tell no one. Come alone." Emily read the words as though they carried a new heartbeat into her chest. She glanced at the wall clock. It was only 4 in the afternoon. 4 long hours still ahead, every minute stretched out like a lifetime. Inside her, suspicion and hope wrestled fiercely. If this was real, it meant Charles had lied from the beginning. It meant he had intentionally concealed the severity of her injury, all to keep her pliant, compliant, a puppet on a string. But if this was a trap, if the woman did not exist, or worse, if Charles knew everything and was merely testing whether she would dare betray him, then the consequences would be devastating. Emily no longer knew what was true and what was false. But for the first time in 6 months of living like a prisoner inside a gilded cage, she felt the faintest crack in the unbreakable wall around her. And sometimes a crack was enough for light to slip through. She clutched the phone tightly, hid it beneath her pillow, then lay back on the bed, closing her eyes as though she were resting. But her mind refused to rest. 8 o'clock tonight, behind the greenhouse. A stranger waiting, and perhaps, waiting alongside her, the first fragile possibility of freedom. For the 4 long hours she waited for 8 o'clock that night, Emily could not sit still even though her body felt drained, and her swollen ankle throbbed so fiercely that the slightest movement sent beads of sweat breaking across her skin. Yet her mind remained frighteningly sharp. For the first time in 6 months of captivity inside this gilded cage, she felt she was holding something that did not belong to Charles, an ability, a choice, a fragile chance. She had to use it. She had to plan. She parted the curtains of her bedroom window just enough to peer outside into the back garden. The greenhouse sat in the far left corner, near the row of red maples already shedding their leaves. From her second-floor vantage point, she could see the entire backgrounds, including the service gate where delivery trucks occasionally stopped. She watched 2 men in black patrolling, each taking a different route, meeting precisely at the old oak tree before splitting off again. The moment they crossed paths and turned back gave her roughly 2 minutes. She timed it with the stopwatch on the small clock she kept by the window, watching the pattern repeat itself 3 full cycles until she confirmed the rhythm was exact. She stepped away from the window, breath tight. 2 minutes. She would have 2 minutes to leave her room, descend to the first floor, slip through the side hallway, cut through the kitchen, reach the service door, cross the backyard, and make it to the greenhouse without being seen. There was not much time for calculations, but she had no alternative. She tucked the phone inside her nightdress, wrapped bandages tightly around her ankle to stabilize the aching bone, then opened her wardrobe and pulled out a long coat to drape over her nightgown and hide the swelling. She opened her bedroom door slowly enough that her hand trembled from tension. The second-floor hallway was deserted. All overhead lights had been dimmed. She moved carefully, bracing herself against the wall, her ears alert like a small creature navigating its way through a forest. Reaching the first floor, she chose the side passage, where the staff often carried food when Charles had no guests. That area had no cameras, or at least none that Emily had ever seen functioning. Whenever Charles passed by, he never once turned his head in its direction, as though the space did not exist. She slipped through the kitchen. The faint scent of roasted meat lingered in the air, but the room was empty. At this hour, everything had already been cleaned, leaving only a few utensils hanging on the wall and a dim desk lamp casting a pale glow over the counter. She reached the door leading to the servants' corridor, her hand closing around the handle, her heart pounding against her ribs. Just then, footsteps echoed from far down the hall. Emily pressed herself against the cold wall, holding her breath. A young maid passed by carrying a tray of clean linens, her head bowed. She did not see Emily, or if she did, she pretended not to. Only when the girl's shadow vanished around the corner did Emily dare push the door open a crack. A gust of cold wind swept in. She stepped outside carefully, her eyes fixed on the greenhouse. The yard between the main house and the greenhouse stretched roughly 30 meters, paved with stone and offering no cover. She would have to time her crossing within the 2-minute interval when the guards switched directions. She checked the clock. 19:58. 2 more minutes. She waited, her heart beat so loud she could hear it inside her ears. At precisely 19:60, she saw the 2 men pivot, one turning toward the main house, the other toward the fence. She clenched her teeth and stepped forward. Each step was agony. Her ankle burned as though set on fire, but she could not stop. The cold wind whipped against her face, her thin clothes useless against it. Yet her body felt feverish from adrenaline. She crossed the open yard, not daring to look back. When she was only a few strides from the glass door of the greenhouse, she heard dogs barking in the distance. A low growl followed somewhere behind her. Had someone noticed? No, not yet. She limped forward and slipped inside the greenhouse, her trembling hand pushing against the cold glass door. Inside, it was pitch black. No one was there. No voice calling her name. No trace of Dr. Lauren Parker. Emily turned slowly, her eyes adjusting to the dark. Outside, footsteps began to echo. Someone was approaching. She held her breath and pressed herself behind a large potted plant. A beam of flashlight swept across the glass, then disappeared. Silence returned. Emily crouched low, pressing her body against the freezing floor. Outside lay danger. Inside, only unanswered questions. Where was Dr. Parker? Was someone playing with her? But no matter what the truth was, She could not go back now. She had left her room. She had stepped into an escape with no path backward, and that meant she had no choice but to keep going, at any cost. Emily crouched behind the large potted plant inside the greenhouse, her heartbeat still unsteady after the flash of a flashlight had sliced across the glass a moment earlier. There was no sign of Dr. Parker, no footsteps, not even a whisper. Everything was eerily silent, broken only by the faint rattle of wind against the glass frames and the frantic thudding of her own pulse. She checked the time. It was 8:12. The doctor had not come, or she had come and been discovered. Or worse, there had never been anyone named Lauren Parker at all. A deception, or a chance that slipped through her fingers. But Emily knew she could not return. She had already left her room, already passed the guards. If she went back now, she would never have another chance. That thought pushed her to her feet, limping toward the greenhouse's back door, the one she remembered seeing delivery trucks and gardening supplies parked near. The old metal door opened onto a small gravel path leading to the storage shed. She hobbled forward, each step sending a stabbing burst through her ankle as though the bone wanted to tear free, but she gritted her teeth and pressed on. When she reached the shed, she saw something she could never have expected. An old moss-green pickup truck parked inside, keys still in the ignition. She did not know whether it was luck or a trap, but she had no other option. She opened the door, dragging her useless left leg inside with a suppressed scream of agony. Tears blurred her vision, but she forced herself to look at the gear stick attached to the steering column. Thank God it was an automatic. She wouldn't need to use her broken leg for the clutch. She slammed the door, turned the key, and jammed her right foot onto the gas pedal. The engine rumbled to life slowly, its growl echoing through the night like the opening roar of her escape. Using only her good leg to switch between brake and accelerator, she backed out of the shed and steered toward the side gate. No one appeared, no shouting, no alarms. She saw the side gate left half open, as if someone had deliberately created an opening for her. Without thinking further, she pressed the accelerator and shot down the dirt road toward the main street. In her mind, she had one goal: get as far away from the mansion as possible. She did not know where she was going, but anywhere was better than that luxurious hell. She only needed to get past the forest surrounding the estate, reach a gas station, a store, a stranger, anyone who could witness she existed. The truck jolted violently over the rugged road, but she did not slow down. Wind whipped through the cracked window, tangling her hair, her eyes wide and fiercely alert. But as she rounded the third bend, blinding headlights burst into view ahead. A black SUV blocked the road, its engine growling with menace. Emily slammed on the brakes, her body pitching forward. She shifted the gear, ready to reverse, but the SUV's doors flew open. Two men in black stepped out, and at the same moment the back door opened and Charles emerged, adjusting the sleeves of his immaculate white shirt as though he had just stepped out of a boardroom, not pursued a fleeing prisoner. He walked toward her truck, his eyes darkening, his jaw clenched so tightly it seemed to hold back an eruption. She locked the doors, her hands trembling as she shrank backward in her seat, but he gestured sharply, and one of the men slammed his palm against her window, shouting, "Open the door! Now!" Emily did not move. Charles stepped closer, tapping lightly on the glass with his knuckle. "You truly thought you could escape me in that rusted little truck?" His voice was soft, measured, each word dripping into her mind like acid. "Emily, you have disappointed me deeply," he signaled again. The other man pulled out a window-breaking tool. In a few seconds they would shatter it. She had no choice. She could not fight three men, not with her injured leg, not with her body barely holding together. Her hands shook as she turned the lock. The door was pulled open instantly. A hand as hard as steel grabbed her shoulder and yanked her out of the driver's seat. She struggled, but Charles was already standing in front of her, his eyes filled with a cold, simmering rage. "I have given you everything. Safety, food, clothes, shelter. You owe me your entire life, and this is how you repay me? By running like a thief?" Emily gasped, tears spilling uncontrollably. "I am not your possession. I cannot live like this anymore." Charles let out a small, hollow laugh, one that never reached his eyes. "No, Emily, you are mine because your father signed you over to me, and I do not tolerate betrayal, especially not from you." He turned, gesturing to his men. "Take her back. Double the guards. No one gets near her." Emily was shoved into the SUV, two strong arms pinning her between them like iron clamps. As the vehicle rolled forward, she twisted to look at the road she had fought so desperately to cross. Darkness swallowed everything, including the fragile spark of hope she had just tasted. But deep in her chest, Her heart refused to surrender. Even in failure, she had learned the most important truth. There was a weakness somewhere. Charles was not invincible, and if another chance came, she would not let it slip through her fingers. Emily was locked inside the third-floor room of the mansion, a former storage space that had been converted into a sealed chamber with no windows, no electrical outlets, no phone signal, only a dim ceiling lamp casting a cold, interrogation room kind of light. The door was double-locked from the outside, and the only person who entered was a silent man who delivered meals 3 times a day, never speaking, never looking her in the eye, never showing anything beyond duty. After her failed escape, Charles kept her here as a severe punishment. He did not strike her, did not shout, did not torture her, but the chilling precision of his control frightened her more than any blow ever could. She no longer knew how many days had passed. 3 days, or 5, or perhaps an entire week. Her body was exhausted, especially her left leg. Every attempt to move sent a jolt of pain shooting up her spine, forcing her to bite her lip until she tasted blood. She had no bandages, no pain medication, and the swelling had now spread all the way to her knee. She lay motionless on a thin mattress placed upon the cold wooden floor, her mind spinning with questions that had no answers. Was Dr. Lauren Parker real? Why had she sent that message? Why had she not appeared at the greenhouse as promised? Had she been discovered? Or worse, had she betrayed Emily and lured her into a trap so Charles could catch her in the act? Her thoughts circled endlessly through suspicion, fear, despair, and exhaustion, until one evening, when the heavy wooden door suddenly swung open. Emily startled upright, pressing her back against the wall, her heartbeat pounding wildly. But the person who entered was not Charles. It was the same servant who always brought her meals. He walked in with a stoic expression, carrying a bucket of cleaning water and a rag, pretending to clean a spill on the floor near her mattress. He did not look at her, but as he scrubbed the floorboards, his hand moved with lightning speed, sliding a small object wrapped in a dark cloth from his sleeve directly under the edge of her mattress. He tapped the floor once, a silent signal, then stood up, picked up the bucket, and walked out as if nothing had happened. The door closed immediately behind him. Emily waited a breathless moment before reaching under the mattress. Her fingers brushed against cold metal. A phone. Disbelief flooded her. Another trap? Or the smallest miracle inside the depths of hell? She crawled toward it, her hands trembling as she lifted the device. The screen lit up. A call was coming in. An unknown number. She stared at the name displayed. Dr. Lauren Parker. She hesitated for a single heartbeat, then answered. Hello? Her voice was hoarse from days without speaking. A woman's voice sounded on the other end, low, steady, composed. Emily? It's me, Lauren Parker. If you can hear me, do not say anything yet. Just listen. I do not know the level of surveillance you are under. Emily covered her mouth with her hand as tears surged uncontrollably. Her mind spun, overwhelmed. At last, the voice was real. I was the physician who admitted you to the hospital nearly 3 weeks ago after your fall down the stairs. Your initial injury report was clear. Fracture of the left fibula, requiring immediate surgery. But afterward, a man named Maddox arrived, intervened, and signed for your transfer. The file was sealed. I could not contact you through any official system, but I could not ignore what I saw. Emily froze. A fracture, surgery, a sealed medical record. Everything she had suspected was true. Charles had taken her, hidden her from the medical system, silenced everyone. I tried reaching out through multiple channels, Parker continued. Finally, someone inside his mansion agreed to help me pass information. He cannot reveal himself, but thanks to him, I was able to get this phone to you. Her voice paused for a moment. Can you speak? Emily inhaled shakily, her words barely a whisper. I can. I'm locked in. I do not know where exactly. I can't walk. My leg. I think it's much worse now. I understand. Listen carefully, Emily. I have contacted someone who can help you get out. He is not police, but he specializes in extraction. His name is Nathan Blackwood. He served in the military and now works as an independent security consultant. I trust him completely. Emily closed her eyes, gripping the phone tightly. A name, a plan. Another stranger, but this time, not a vague message, not a meeting that never happened. This was a real voice, carrying real hope. We will not rush, Parker said gently. He is gathering information, triangulating your location, and determining the safest moment to get you out. But the requirement is that you must stay alive and unharmed until then. Do you understand? Emily nodded, though no one could see her. I understand. Good. Do not attempt to escape again. Wait for the signal. I will contact you through this phone. And Emily, you have been incredibly brave. Do not lose yourself." The call ended. The screen went dark. But inside Emily, for the first time in so many months, a small but unmistakable light appeared. She was no longer alone. She had hope, and she would cling to it as if it were her very last breath. Nathan Blackwood stood on the rooftop balcony of an old building in the Chelsea neighborhood of New York, holding a cup of black coffee without sugar, his sharp, cold eyes quietly scanning the traffic below. The 36-year-old man, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark brown hair cut short in a military style, had once been a commander in a Navy SEAL Special Operations Unit, later transitioning to work for an independent intelligence division. After leaving the service, he formed a team specializing in hostage extractions and handling sensitive situations where conventional law could no longer intervene. No theatrics, no traces left behind, and above all, no failures. Within the underground security world, the name Nathan Blackwood served as a silent warning. Inside the apartment behind him, computer screens displayed schematics of the Maddox estate, satellite images, old architectural blueprints, and files of former employees. At the center of the display was a portrait of Emily Carter, accompanied by a single note, "Protect at all costs." Nathan took a slow sip of coffee before returning to his desk, where Dr. Lauren Parker sat with a face drawn tight by tension yet firm with determination. "I've spoken to her. She trusts me. But Charles Maddox is a monster. He controls every piece of manpower inside that estate. No one can be trusted. She's being held somewhere, but I can't pinpoint the exact location." Nathan nodded slightly, his fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. "I've identified 4 suspicious sectors within the mansion, including a third-floor storage room that may have been converted. The security camera system has multiple blind spots, but he may have installed signal-blocking devices to prevent any outbound communication." He pulled another image onto the screen, enlarging the greenhouse area and the storage shed behind it. "There are signs of a previous escape attempt. A rear door forced open outside of scheduled hours, tire tracks on the gravel that were hastily wiped. He knows she will try again. From this point on, every entrance and exit will be doubled in security." Lauren placed her hand on the table. "I have someone inside, a housemaid. She was the one who smuggled the phone in for Emily, but she cannot take the risk again. If she's exposed, she won't survive it." Nathan looked at her with a mixture of sympathy and unyielding resolve. "We only need one moment. One chance to get Emily out without Maddox realizing it beforehand. I've mapped out the escape routes, analyzed guard rotation patterns, electrical grids, even the old wartime emergency tunnel beneath the basement." He opened another file, this one containing information on Charles Maddox himself, business ties, assets, money laundering networks, and shadowy investments linked to Eastern European criminal organizations. He's not just a ruthless businessman. He's protected by men who kill without hesitation. This isn't a simple rescue. It's a battle against an entire system. Lauren met his gaze. "I don't need you to win a war. I just need you to get Emily out alive." Nathan set his coffee down and looked back at the screen where Emily's face was illuminated, her eyes filled with fear and pain, yet carrying something else beneath it, a spark of life. "I'll get her out. But to do that, I need a team. The best, trusted, unbound by rules." He tapped a sequence of numbers on his personal communicator. "I'm calling the old unit. Once we begin, we don't stop. There is no turning back." Lauren nodded. "I'll prepare all medical files. If we can get her out, I can operate immediately." Nathan remained silent for a moment, eyes still fixed on the screen. "We have at most 10 days. Every day her condition worsens, and Maddox tightens his guard. There's no room for mistakes." He rose, gathering the documents, his expression sharpening into steel-cold focus. "The game has begun, and I do not play to lose." In his heart, the name Emily Carter was no longer a file to process. It had become a mission to protect at any cost, and he knew that in a world ruled by shadows, sometimes it took only one person, standing in the right place at the right moment, to change everything. He intended to be that person. At 1:30 in the morning, the forest surrounding the Maddox estate was drowned in a suffocating darkness. The sky held no moon. The wind sliced cold through the trembling leaves, and the night was so still that even the faint drop of a brittle twig could be heard against the forest floor. It was the moment Nathan Blackwood's team chose to act. 4 men, each a specialist who had once served in classified operations across global conflict zones, now moved in non-reflective black gear, wearing internal comms and carrying weapons designed for silence. Nathan led them, his eyes razor-focused, missing nothing, not a shift of shadow, not a gust of wind. The mansion loomed between the trees like a colossal block of marble, beautiful and deadly. Its security cameras were cleverly arranged, but not flawless. Nathan had identified 2 blind zones at the rear and at the basement level, the location of an old Prohibition-era escape route long forgotten. The team slid beneath the low-voltage fence, cut the power at the underground junction point they had pinpointed earlier, then followed the outer wall toward the hatch. Nathan used a specialized tool to unlock the old metal cover, and one by one, they slipped into the darkness below. Beneath the ground was a narrow tunnel, damp and rank with the smell of mold. Every step echoed like a heartbeat because they knew that at the end of this passage waited a life in desperate need of rescue. The old blueprints showed the tunnel led directly to a 3rd-floor storage room, likely where Emily was being held. When they reached the spiral steel staircase, Nathan signaled for a halt, checked the feed from the mini-camera on his chest, then motioned them forward. Every step was a test of nerves. On the 1st floor, one of the team members, Cole, split off to jam the central alarm system. All remained silent until a faint noise drifted from the kitchen. A guard appeared, taking an unscheduled patrol route. The team held their breath. The man walked dangerously close, less than 10 feet from where Nathan stood. In a single ghost-like movement, Nathan drew his combat knife, neutralized the guard in the span of one breath, then dragged the body into the shadows. Not a sound. He checked his watch. 12 minutes left before the next shift rotation. The 3rd floor was still and dead quiet. When they reached the heavy wooden door, Nathan tapped 3 short knocks and 2 long ones, the signal he had agreed upon with Emily in case she still had the phone. No answer. He hesitated for a second, then signaled to break the lock. The door flew open. Inside, Emily lay curled on the floor, her face pale as paper, her lips tinted blue, but her eyes widened the moment strangers entered. She tried to rise by instinct, but collapsed from the pain in her leg. Nathan rushed to catch her, pressing a finger to his lips to urge silence. "I'm Nathan. Dr. Parker sent me." Emily choked on a sob, unable to speak, only gripping his hand with a desperate strength. One of the team quickly examined her injury and shook his head at the sight of her badly swollen, darkly bruised leg. "She can't walk. We need an immediate carry-out." They signaled Cole downstairs, confirming the escape route was clear. But in that exact moment, the alarm began to howl through the mansion. Someone had discovered the breach. Lights flared on. Emergency strobes flashed. Charles knew. He knew. "We're blown. Change of plan. Get her to the basement. We exit through the tunnel," Nathan ordered, sweeping Emily into his arms as if she weighed nothing. She clung to him, her entire body trembling from pain, from terror. Heavy footsteps thundered across the halls. Maddox's men were closing in. Gunfire erupted on the 1st floor. Cole crackled over the comms, his voice breaking. "They're more than we expected. I'll hold them off. Move." Nathan clenched his jaw, pushing his pace faster. A spray of bullets tore into the wall behind them as they reached the basement. The hatch burst open. Cold air from the underground corridor blasted their faces like the breath of freedom. After nearly 40 minutes navigating the tunnel, they emerged into the forest behind the estate, where a helicopter waited. When the doors shut and the aircraft lifted off, Emily looked down at the Maddox mansion swallowed in flashing lights and wailing sirens. For the first time in months, she was leaving her prison behind, yet her heart felt unbearably heavy with everything she had witnessed. Beside her, Nathan placed a steady hand on her shoulder, his voice low and certain. "You're safe now, and this is only the beginning." Emily awoke in a hospital room washed in a soft, pale white glow, the space so quiet that the steady beep of the heart monitor sounded like a reminder that she was, in fact, still alive. The scent of antiseptic mixed with the cool air from the vents made her dizzy for a moment, but the dull, throbbing ache in her left leg quickly pulled her back into reality. She blinked, her mind still hazy from anesthesia. When she managed to look around, she found herself in a private recovery room, clean, calm, untouched by the cold stone walls of the mansion, untouched by threats or control. Her leg was secured in a thick, specialized brace. An IV line fed into her arm, and various machines tracked her vital signs with quiet precision. The door opened gently, and a familiar voice drifted in. "Good morning, Emily." It was Dr. Lauren Parker, dressed in a white coat, her face carrying both exhaustion and relief. "The surgery went well. We had to place screws to stabilize the fibula and realign the ankle joint. The inflammation around the joint was quite severe, likely from being untreated for so long, but you're past the dangerous stage now." Emily parted her lips, her voice rough. "My leg? Will take time, the doctor replied softly. At least 6 months of physical therapy before you can walk normally again. If you follow the plan carefully, your chances of a full recovery are very high. She paused, then leaned closer, taking Emily's hand in hers. You've been incredibly strong. But from here, the path won't necessarily be easier. It only shifts into another kind of fight, the fight to reclaim your life. Emily nodded, tears slipping silently down her cheeks, not from pain, but because for the first time, she heard a voice with no control, no threat, only genuine care. Doctor. Parker squeezed her hand once more before stepping out, giving her space. Only minutes later, the door opened again. Nathan entered, no longer in tactical gear but in a deep blue shirt, sleeves rolled up, his eyes still sharp yet holding a softness she had never seen before. He approached her slowly, pausing before pulling a chair to her bedside. Hey! Emily looked at him, her lips trembling. You're not hurt? Nathan let out a quiet laugh and shook his head. I'm fine. The whole team is fine. Cole is a little scraped up, but he made it out with us. The rescue was successful, Emily. You're free now. The word free rang through her mind like something almost unreal, yet it came accompanied by an unexpected emptiness. Because freedom after months of captivity did not burst open like a grand door. It unfolded like a narrow path shaped by pain and uncertainty. I don't know what I'm supposed to do next, she whispered. Nathan leaned forward, his voice steady and grounded. You don't have to know right now. The only thing you need to do is heal. I'll be here. Dr. Parker will be here. No one is taking you anywhere again. No Charles. No mansion. No threats. Emily turned toward the window. Dawn was breaking, the first morning light spreading into the room like a delicate reassurance. She closed her eyes and drew in a long breath, letting her heart slowly accept that things had truly changed. Nathan didn't leave. Throughout the first days after surgery, he stayed. He didn't ask questions, didn't push her to relive anything. He simply sat there quiet, steady, like a wall built to protect rather than confine, letting her know that whenever she opened her eyes, she would not be alone. Every morning, he brought black coffee and a book. Every night, he adjusted her pillows, checked her IV, and shared small stories from missions in faraway places. Little by little, Emily stopped flinching at the sound of footsteps. She began to eat more, speak more, and even smile faintly whenever Nathan attempted one of his awkward jokes. It wasn't a miracle. It was a beginning, and for her, that was enough for today. The first morning of physical rehabilitation began with a bolt of pain so sharp it pierced straight into Emily's skull, forcing her to swallow a sob right there in the therapy room. She had to relearn how to command her own body, every centimeter of movement, waking muscles that had been locked in stone after months of forced stillness. Each attempt to bend her left leg sending the sensation of hundreds of needles driving through bone and flesh. Sweat streamed down her spine, her whole body trembling even though the room's temperature remained steady. She clenched her teeth, gripping the edge of the therapy table while the physical therapist beside her nodded in quiet encouragement but offered no mercy. Just a little more, Emily. You can do this. But Emily wasn't sure. There were moments she wondered whether this life had anything left for her, or whether she was simply stretching her suffering into a different shape. And yet every afternoon, when she finished the session and returned to her recovery room to find Nathan waiting with a cup of ginger tea and the book she had once mentioned in passing, something in her steadied. He never asked how her session went, never commented on her pace. He simply sat there, sharing some small, ordinary story, as though the world outside continued moving even while she was stuck between agony and healing. One rainy afternoon, as Nathan helped her shift from the bed into the wheelchair, Emily unexpectedly whispered, "Why did you choose this work? Saving people like me?" Nathan froze for the smallest moment, his hand still steadying her shoulder, before answering quietly, "Because once, someone I loved never had anyone come for them." The answer was simple yet heavy. Emily didn't ask more. She only glanced at him, and for the first time, she didn't see the steel-edged man who carried her out of hell, but a person with wounds of his own hidden beneath armor. In the days that followed, something in the air between them changed. Emily began to share more sometimes childhood memories, sometimes the nightmares that still came from her time in the Maddox mansion. Nathan never interrupted, never judged, simply listened, and occasionally laid a reassuring hand over hers as if to say she didn't need to be strong every step of the way. One late night, as they sat on the hospital balcony, the distant city lights glowing like a blur of gold through the mist, Emily turned toward him. "If someday I can walk normally again, do you think things can really start over?" Nathan met her gaze, his voice low and steady. "You don't need to walk perfectly to start again. You just need to stop stepping backward." The words etched themselves into her heart like an unspoken promise. The therapy sessions remained grueling. Her body still fought her. The pain still flared. But something essential had changed. She was no longer fighting alone. She knew there would be days when she collapsed. But she also knew someone would be there to help her stand again. What grew between them wasn't a blazing romance, but a quiet, deep connection built slowly, patiently. Something woven from trust. In every moment, Nathan wiped the sweat from her forehead. Every time he stayed when she cried through the exercises. Every morning he left a small flower on her breakfast tray with a hurried note that read, "Keep going, warrior." Emily still had a long road ahead, but for the first time, she believed she would make it to the end of it, not only to escape her past, but to live fully for her future, with herself as the one choosing each step she took. The day Charles Maddox was arrested, the sky over New York City unleashed a relentless downpour, as if the weather itself were witnessing the closing of a long and dark chapter. News reports flooded the morning broadcasts, plastered with sensational headlines. Financial tycoon brought down. Maddox Capital executive charged with unlawful imprisonment, money laundering, and abuse of power. Charles's cold, arrogant face appeared in footage of him handcuffed and escorted by federal agents, and Emily instinctively tightened her grip on the armrest of her wheelchair as she watched from the hospital room television. Her heart did not leap with triumph as she had once imagined. Instead, an empty ache seeped into the cracks of memories not yet healed. She was not surprised. Ever since Nathan's team delivered their files to the FBI, combined with the testimony of Dr. Lauren Parker and protected internal witnesses, the empire of crimes Charles had built over the years had begun to collapse layer by layer. But what unsettled Emily was the request from the federal prosecutor 3 days later. They needed her to testify. With everything she had endured, everything she had seen and survived, her words could be the final nail that sealed Charles's prison door. At first, she remained silent. Every night when she closed her eyes, she still dreamed of the cold stone mansion, the echo of Charles's footsteps down the hallway, the icy gaze tracking her every breath, the thought of sitting in a courtroom, facing him, recounting each detail as if tearing open wounds still bleeding made her chest tighten. But one breezy afternoon, as she practiced taking slow, careful steps along the hospital corridor with Nathan at her side, steadying her by the elbow, she suddenly asked him, "If I don't testify, will he get away?" Nathan was quiet for a few seconds before answering gently, "He will still be tried. But if you speak, the next victim won't have to wait for a miracle like you did." Emily stopped, her gaze drifting to the far end of the corridor where a young boy in a wheelchair was taking his first supported steps with his mother. She knew then she could not live in the shadows forever simply because her past had once been stolen from her. She nodded. "I'll testify." The day she signed her official statement was the first sunny day after weeks of rain. The legal team for witness protection immediately placed her under special care, training her on how to respond in court, preparing her mentally, and strengthening her understanding of the case. Dr. Parker handled the medical oversight, and Nathan stayed with her through every training session, never leaving her side. They didn't force her to recount what was unbearable. They simply helped her arrange the truth in order, so she would not be psychologically manipulated in the courtroom. Each night before bed, she read through her statement again, her hands shaking, but the fear no longer consuming her. She understood that her voice was the only weapon she had against the man who once owned every inch of her life. She spoke not only for herself, but for all those like her, those who never had the chance to speak. 1 week before the trial, Emily was moved to a safe house under FBI supervision. When the car stopped in front of the small apartment building on the outskirts of Brooklyn, Nathan opened the door and offered his hand to her not as part of a mission, but as a simple gesture from someone who had always shown up, without needing to be asked. Emily stepped into the apartment and drew in a long breath, letting the scent of fresh wood and the soft sunlight spilling through the windows wash over her like a quiet beginning. She was no longer imprisoned. Now she was the one who chose what came next, and she had chosen to speak. The courtroom awaited, and she would walk into it on the very legs that had once been shattered, with the very voice that had once been forced into silence. This time, she would not speak for anyone else. She would speak for herself. Courtroom 38 of the Manhattan Federal Courthouse was packed to the last seat on the morning of the sentencing. The gallery overflowed with reporters, supporters of the victims, and those drawn by sheer curiosity. At the center table, Charles Maddox sat motionless in a charcoal gray suit. The same cold slate eyes Emily remembered from the very first day, only this time he no longer stood above anyone, no longer cloaked in power or authority. His wrists were cuffed, federal guards flanking him on both sides. He was the one being judged now, not the one giving orders. Emily sat in the witness section, her hands resting on her knee, trembling faintly yet steady in resolve. She had prepared for this moment for weeks, rehearsing every word, every thought, until they became a battle rhythm engraved into her mind. When the prosecutor called her name, the entire room fell into a stillness so deep she could hear her own footsteps ringing through each breath as she rose. Every step she took on her crutches was a cut into the fragile courage she had rebuilt, but each step was also a move toward freedom. Standing at the witness stand, she drew a long breath and let her eyes meet Charles's. He stared back, unblinking, a gaze caught somewhere between scorn and defiance. But this time, Emily did not look away. Her voice rose soft but clear, and each word carried the weight of someone who had once been broken and was now rising from the very ground where she had been crushed. She spoke of the first days she was taken into the Maddox estate, of the so-called marriage arrangement that was nothing more than deliberate imprisonment. She spoke of the times she begged to see a doctor as her leg throbbed with unbearable pain, only to be refused. She described being pushed down the staircase by his sister and afterward locked away, denied medical care and isolated from every living soul. She recounted the night she tried to escape, the roadblock that stopped her, the forced return, the confinement like an animal behind bars. With each detail spoken aloud, she felt pieces of the old fear crumble, as if the darkness lost its grip the moment it was dragged into the light. Then she paused. Looking directly at the panel of judges, she said in a voice tight with emotion yet unwavering that she was not there merely to speak of her own suffering. She was there for the women who had been silenced by systems of power, women who had never been given the chance to stand where she stood. She spoke of the dreams she had each night, hearing her father's voice again, feeling sunlight through a window, and of someone who placed a steadying hand on her shoulder at a time she believed she had nothing left to hold on to. She ended her testimony with a sentence that plunged the entire room into a long, breathless silence. "I do not want him punished for hurting me. I want him punished for believing he could steal my right to live as a human being and walk away without consequence." When she stepped down from the stand, whispers rippled through the courtroom, while Charles remained silent, though his eyes darkened and the false composure he had worn earlier began to crack. 3 days later, the judge delivered the verdict. Charles Maddox was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without parole, convicted of unlawful imprisonment, abuse of power, obstruction of justice, and operating a large-scale money laundering network. When the sentence was read, Emily did not cry. She did not smile. She simply sat quiet, her fingers wrapped tightly around Nathan's hand resting on her lap. It was not triumph she felt, but release. Charles had been stripped of control, unable to harm anyone again, and she, once again, had survived. When she left the courthouse that day, the New York sky was bright with sunlight. The early spring cold flushed her cheeks, but inside, warmth slowly took root like the beginning of something new. A reporter hurried toward her, asking how she felt after the verdict. Emily offered only one sentence before walking on. "Freedom does not come from running. Freedom comes from facing what hunted you. And today, I faced it." Emily's new apartment sat on the 6th floor of a quiet building in suburban Queens, with a small balcony overlooking a park and morning light that flooded the rooms as soon as the sun rose. It was not a luxurious place, but to her, every tiled square of the floor, every white wall, every corner of the little kitchen where she brewed her first cup of coffee each day held a meaning she had yearned for: freedom. She no longer had to glance over her shoulder each time she stepped into the hallway, no longer had to measure every look to see if someone was watching her. On her first morning there, she stood before the mirror wearing a cream-colored blouse and soft fabric pants, her long hair falling gently over her shoulders. Her face was still thin, but the panic that once lived in her eyes had begun to fade. She drew a deep breath, opened her laptop, and began her new job as a freelance content editor for an online medical magazine. It was a position Dr. Lauren Parker had helped her secure, knowing Emily was not yet ready to re-enter crowded spaces but needed a purpose, something steady to guide her back into ordinary life. The work did not demand much physically, but it required focus and structure. Articles on trauma recovery, mental health care, and post-injury rehabilitation became the field she worked in. Each time she edited a patient's account, Emily felt as though she was reading an echo of herself, her early days of weakness, panic, and uncertainty. But instead of dragging her backward, it reminded her that what she had survived was not merely suffering, but proof that a person can rise again from their own ruins. Nathan often visited on weekends, bringing fresh flowers, small treats from the farmer's market, or sometimes just an old movie for them to watch together on the gray sofa she had recently bought. He never imposed, never asked for anything. He simply showed up, quiet and steady, an invisible anchor on the days when she still dreamed of slamming locks and hurried footsteps behind her. One afternoon on the balcony, Emily said softly, "I used to think I would never be able to live a normal life again." Nathan didn't answer right away. He looked at her for a long moment and then replied, "Normal isn't a destination. It's a path you get to define for yourself." Words like that, simple, yet deeply felt, helped Emily realize she didn't need to become someone else to begin again. She only needed to be herself, a little more each day, even if her steps were sometimes uneven, even if her heart was not yet entirely calm. She began doing yoga again at home through online videos, tending to a few small plants on her windowsill, even learning to cook new meals. Each small action felt like laying another brick in rebuilding the structure of her own life, no longer dependent, no longer controlled. One evening, as she reread the recovery journal she had kept during her first days in the hospital, Emily found herself smiling. The shaky handwriting, the tear-stained pages filled with pain and exhaustion, had transformed into proof that she had journeyed farther than she ever thought possible. No one could take that from her, and more importantly, she no longer felt fear when she looked back. Outside her window, spring was arriving, dry branches sprouting tender green buds, much like her own heart learning how to beat again for hope. This new life did not arrive with a grand explosion, but with small steps, steady and deliberate. And now, each morning when she woke, she no longer asked whether she would survive. She simply whispered to herself, "Today, I will continue to live." One May morning, as sunlight spilled through the kitchen window and Emily prepared a simple breakfast of eggs and toast, the doorbell rang. She felt no alarm. Mail deliveries always arrived at the same punctual hour. When she opened the door, the mail carrier smiled and handed her a pale brown envelope with no return address, only her name written in a sharp, angular hand. She thought nothing of it at first, assuming it was some administrative document. But when she opened it and her eyes scanned the first lines, her hands began to tremble, the veins beneath her skin tightening like pulled wire. The letter was handwritten, not long, but every word felt as if carved with a cold blade. "You think you can escape all of this, Emily. Think the court will protect you forever. Traitors never have peaceful endings. Do not make me remind you that what begins in blood also ends in blood." Beneath the final line was Charles Maddox's signature, messy yet unmistakable. Emily gripped the paper, feeling herself dragged backward into the abyss she thought she had escaped. She immediately called the agent assigned to her witness protection case. Less than an hour later, her little apartment was surrounded by a discreet layer of security. Nathan arrived that afternoon, his expression darkening as he read the letter, his fist clenching so tightly the knuckles turned white. "You didn't do anything wrong," Emily said when she saw him silently staring at the page as though he could tear it apart with his gaze alone. He nodded, but the tension in his broad shoulders betrayed everything he didn't say out loud. Even with Charles imprisoned in a high-security facility, it didn't mean he no longer had reach or influence. She knew it, and Nathan knew it too. 2 days later, while Nathan was leaving his office to meet an old informant on the outskirts of the city, his car exploded, less than 3 minutes after he stepped out of the parking lot. The blast rattled the entire block, metal fragments scattering like a storm of fire. By sheer luck, he had stopped midway to buy a cup of coffee, something he never did in the afternoons. When he returned, he found only rising smoke and a street cordoned off by police. Emily received the call while reading documents at her kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a still warm cup of tea. Nathan's voice came through the phone, hoarse and broken. He was safe, stunned by the shockwave, but otherwise unharmed. She didn't say a word, only set her cup down as cold sweat dampened her palms. For the first time in weeks, she felt fear rising inside her chest like an old ghost. She cried silently, tears falling onto trembling hands. Nathan returned to the apartment that evening with a few scratches on his face and exhaustion clouding his eyes. Emily rushed into him, holding on as if letting go would cause him to disappear. He held her for a long time, then whispered against her ear, "This is not your fault, and I'm not going anywhere." The incident was investigated immediately. Nathan's team and the FBI expanded the case, combing through every remaining thread of Charles's network. They believed someone inside the prison or outside in the world remained fiercely loyal to him and was carrying out retaliation. Even so, Emily knew one truth. The enemy might still be out there, but this time she was not alone, and Nathan was not someone who fell easily. Within her rose a familiar feeling stronger now than ever. Not fear, but resolve. Charles had tried to bring everything crashing down, but he had forgotten one thing. What a person rebuilds with willpower cannot be destroyed by threats or by hands soaked in violence. She tightened her grip on Nathan's hand, their eyes meeting in a silent, wordless vow. If Charles still reached his bloody hand through the bars, they would be the ones to sever it. This time, for good. The bombing of Nathan's car was not merely a warning, it was a declaration of war, but what those behind it failed to anticipate was that they had awakened the coldest, most decisive instinct in a man trained to survive the darkest corners of the world. Within 36 hours of the explosion, Nathan convened an emergency meeting at the Special Operations Branch of the FBI, coordinating with the rapid response team that had assisted in Emily's rescue. Drawing from years of navigating sensitive missions, he presented a comprehensive plan to dismantle the remnants of the Maddox family's criminal network. The case file on Charles had only scratched the surface. In reality, his shadowed empire was a tangled web of money laundering, weapons trafficking, smuggling operations, and encrypted information markets of staggering sophistication. Nathan knew that unless the system was cut down to its roots, people like Emily would never truly be safe. With full approval from FBI leadership, the operation codenamed Dark Network was launched. Though Emily was advised to distance herself from anything related to the investigation for her own safety and mental well-being, she still chose to sit beside Nathan each night, studying organizational charts, movement maps, and suspect lists. She said very little, but her presence served as a quiet reminder no one dared to overlook. Behind every file lay a victim, a life once crushed under ambition and brutality. The raids were executed simultaneously at 3 o'clock on a Tuesday morning in late spring, sweeping across 7 major cities, from New York to Chicago, from Miami to Los Angeles. Several hidden storage facilities were uncovered, holding tens of millions of dollars in cash, dozens of forged passports, military-grade weapons, and hard drives filled with encrypted transaction data. More than 40 individuals were arrested, including 2 identified as Charles's former right-hand operatives, men responsible for keeping the network alive while he was behind bars. Every site revealed the same truth. The Maddox family was not merely a criminal empire, but a system of influence woven into local government and financial structures. Nathan personally led the strike on a critical location in the outskirts of Newark, a covert operations hub disguised as a logistics company. When the tactical team stormed the building, a few men managed to draw their weapons but could not resist for long. Within 8 minutes, the entire facility was secured, with no casualties on the government side. When Nathan stepped into the control room and saw the transport routes illuminated on the wall, alongside an internal communication network still running mid-transmission, he knew they had severed the monster's last vein. The days that followed were a blur of interrogations, financial tracing, and tracking down loose ends. Though a few individuals had fled overseas, the Maddox network was, for all practical purposes, destroyed. From his prison cell, Charles could do nothing but receive news of his crumbling empire hour after hour. Emily was sitting by her window reading when Lauren Parker called, her voice low and steady. "We did it, Emily. You are safe now." Emily nodded, her eyes stinging but dry. What she felt was no longer fear or anger, only closure. For the first time in months, she slept through the night without a single nightmare. Nathan returned that evening, saying little, simply sitting beside her bed and taking her hand. No words were needed. Both knew the storm had passed. And from this point forward, all that remained was rebuilding on the ashes of the past, with the courage and the love that had kept them standing in the heart of the fire. That morning the sky was heavy and colorless, thick gray clouds blocking even the slightest hint of June sunlight from breaking through the dense, humid air. Emily sat in her car for a full 10 minutes before walking through the gates of Blackridge Federal Prison, where Charles Maddox was serving his sentence. She had thought long and hard before deciding to see him, not because she expected an apology, for she knew such a thing would never come, but because she needed to close the final chapter of a memory that had imprisoned her mind for years. A prison officer led her into the visitation room, divided by a thick pane of glass and equipped with 2 telephones for communication. The room was so cold she had to clasp her hands together for warmth. When the door on the opposite side opened, Charles walked in wearing a dull gray inmate uniform. His hair was shorter, his face visibly older, yet his eyes still held the hint of arrogance that had once carved itself into her bones. He sat down, folded his arms, and stared at her through the glass without speaking. Emily lifted the receiver, pressed it to her ear, and met his gaze without flinching. "I didn't come to argue, Charles," she began, her voice low but steady. "I came to tell you that everything you once tried to control is gone. Your family's power has crumbled. Your system has been erased. And I survived. Charles tightened his lips before finally lifting his own receiver. His voice was deep and slow, but stripped of the dangerous edge it once carried. You think you've won, Emily? I'm still alive. And you will never forget me. She held his stare, unblinking. You're right. I will never forget. But remembering isn't the same as fearing. I remember so that I know I walked out of hell and nothing behind this glass can break me ever again. He fell silent for a long moment, then leaned back and attempted a crooked, almost mocking smile. You've grown stronger, he said, as though admitting something he despised, acknowledging. But no matter what you do, you were once part of my world. She shook her head slowly. No, Charles, I was never part of that world. I am a human being. That's what you never understood. That's the difference between us. You owned everything, but you never kept anyone. He seemed ready to respond, but the look in her eyes stopped him. They were no longer the eyes of a woman who had been held captive. They were the eyes of someone who had faced devastation, risen from it, and returned from a place few survive. Emily set the receiver down and rose without another word. As she turned away, Charles remained seated, his gaze clinging to her back as though trying to hold on to something, but there was nothing left to hold. Emily stepped into the prison corridor, where a thin beam of light finally pierced through the dense blanket of clouds. She inhaled deeply, her legs steady beneath her, walking forward as if she were leaving not only a prison, but the past that once buried her in silence. She did not look back. She no longer needed to. Behind her, an era had ended. Before her, there was absolute freedom. 1 year after the day Emily walked out of the federal prison with a light heart and steady steps, her life turned to a completely new chapter. That June, the sunlight was gentle, and the wind moved softly through the whispering pines of Hudson Valley, where a small outdoor wedding was held beneath the branches of an old tree in the middle of a wide open field, attended only by a few dozen guests, those closest to them, and those who had stood by their side through the long journey of pain and rebirth. Emily wore a simple ivory wedding dress, its soft fabric tracing the shape of a body that had regained strength after months of physical therapy and healing. Her hair fell loosely around her shoulders, adorned with sprigs of pale lavender whose fragrance drifted through the breeze. Nathan stood at the end of the flower-strewn path, his gaze as quiet as the first time he looked at her in the hospital, except now it was the gaze of a man ready to walk with her through a lifetime, not to protect her, but to live beside her. As Emily walked forward, her arm linked with Lauren Parker's, the doctor who had become her greatest friend in the journey of reclaiming herself, Lauren whispered, "Today you are the brightest version of who you are." And Emily smiled without hesitation. The ceremony was solemn yet warm. There was no extravagant aisle, no classical orchestra, only wind, birdsong, and genuine laughter. When the minister asked Nathan if he would walk with Emily through both clear skies and storms, his eyes did not leave hers for even a second. His voice was steadier than ever as he answered that he had stayed beside her when she no longer believed she could live, and now he wanted nothing more than to stay beside her to truly live a life together. Emily looked at him, her eyes holding a whole landscape of memories once shattered but now mended with tenderness. Her vows were not built from scripted phrases, but from the sincerity that had carried her through the storm. She once believed no one would ever love her enough to wait while she learned how to heal, yet he had done exactly that without asking for anything in return. She did not promise they would never argue, or that life would always be easy, but she promised she would never let go of him the way the world once let go of her. Applause rose as they exchanged rings, followed by their first kiss as husband and wife, carried by cheers and joy from their friends. The small reception took place beside the wooden cabin they had rented for the weekend, with simple dishes, light wine, and acoustic music playing from an old speaker. Emily could not dance for long, but Nathan was always beside her, steadying her each step. She laughed, resting her head on his shoulder, and for the first time in years, she felt no need to be on guard, no need to build walls around her heart. That night, after everyone had gone home, they sat beside a small fire, hand in hand, the stars glittering across the sky. Emily leaned against Nathan's chest and whispered that she never believed she could be this happy. Nathan simply smiled, kissed her forehead, and told her she had led herself to happiness he had only walked with her. She looked up at him, her eyes shimmering in the firelight. The old wounds had not vanished, but they were no longer burdens. They had become marks of survival, and in that quiet night, amid the valley filled with cool wind and the scent of wildflowers, Emily knew that the new chapter of her life had truly begun, not through pain, but through love. 1 year after the wedding, Emily was no longer just a survivor, she had become a symbol of rebirth. She began appearing in small discussion panels, sharing her journey through emotional abuse, captivity, and the fear that once made her believe she had no worth left. She did not tell her story with dramatic language or shocking details, but with a raw honesty that tightened the throat, with eyes that had once held despair and now shone with hope. In every conversation, she emphasized that wounds do not define who we are, and the past cannot decide the future if we are brave enough to keep moving forward. She partnered with nonprofit organizations, created free online courses about recognizing early signs of control in relationships, rebuilding emotional health, and guiding women on how to reconstruct their lives after trauma. Emily's talks spread widely not because she was extraordinary, but because she dared to speak about what so many hide: the feeling of no longer being oneself after surviving something too big, too painful. She did not preach or command. She simply shared, listened, and walked alongside others. Gradually, hundreds of women and even some men reached out to her for advice, for comfort, or simply to know they were not alone. She realized that strength was not the absence of fear, but the decision to continue despite it. Nathan was always beside her throughout these journeys, not only as a husband but as the steady anchor behind every choice she made. He did not stand under the spotlight, but was always behind the curtain, ready to step forward the moment she needed him. Emily's story no longer ended with what she endured. It expanded into what she chose to become afterward. From someone controlled, hurt, and nearly erased, she became a sower of hope, a living reminder that anyone, no matter how deep into despair they've fallen, can still walk back into the light with courage as their guide. And you, if you are watching this video, if you have ever felt not strong enough, if you have ever had a moment when giving up seemed easier, remember Emily's story. You are not alone, and you deserve a life that is whole, joyful, and filled with love. If this story touched your heart, please click like and share this video so more people can hear it and find inspiration. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the deep, human stories we share every day. Does Emily's journey remind you of someone in your own life? Or does it reflect something within you? Leave a comment below and share your honest thoughts, because sometimes a single shared word is enough to soothe a hurting heart. We look forward to hearing the feelings that come from deep within your soul. Thank you for staying with this story until the end. Wishing you good health, and may every day of your life be filled with peace and quiet joy. Goodbye, and see you in the next video.